I don't know when you're watching this, dear viewer, but at the time of recording, it is currently the first day of 2023. But unlike what many decadents like to do on New Year's, whereby they merely use it as an excuse to get drunk, act like an animal, and look at pretty lights in the sky, wise men instead use this time as a means of reflection. What went well this year? What went wrong this year? Who did I lose this year? Who did I gain this year? Am I a better person now? Or worse? These are the kinds of questions that everyone should be asking themselves. As though people don't like to think about it, life is a constant journey, whereby we are always changing, though often at such a snail's pace that we don't even realise it. But much like how it's important to look backwards to the past, it's also just as important to look forwards to the future. Hence why it has become a personal tradition of mine to use the last day of the year to make predictions on what I think will happen in the year to come. Thus, throughout this production, we'll be taking a look back at what some of my predictions were for 2022, and then I'll tell you what some of my predictions are for 2023. So without further ado, let's get out our crystal ball, and let's begin. So for each one of these predictions, I'm going to give myself a grade. Green if I was spot on, yellow if I was kind of right, and red if I was completely wrong. Alright, so 1 year ago, I said, predictions for 2022, in order of percentage chance that I think they will actually happen. Number 1. January 6th bullshit. On January 6th, the American media will not stop talking about the 1 year anniversary of the Capitol riots. They will use this as a time to warn NPCs about the rising danger posed by the far right. Painfully overly dramatic to the point of cringe. Chance of happening, 99%.
1 year since the January 6th attack.
The anniversary of the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
The first anniversary of the deadly January 6th assault on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, on January 6th, 2021, just after the 2020 US election, a bunch of hardcore Trump supporters stormed the US Capitol building and rioted around in it for a few hours to protest the handing over of power to the then incoming Biden administration, which is, obviously, not a very wise thing to do. But here's the thing, the American progressives, despite having total domination over almost all of America's institutions, have this unusual victim complex, whereby they actually think that the American conservatives are fascists, despite ironically displaying all of the symptoms of fascism themselves, but nevertheless. Because of this, the January 6th story was essentially the wet dream, because it plays so well into the delusion. And so what the neoliberal media does is take advantage of this and sells it to the progressive useful idiots as if January 6th was actually this serious coup that could have usurped American democracy, when in reality it was just a handful of lunatics wearing Viking helmets. Viking helmets. And so, on its 1 year anniversary, I, and everyone else with a brain, expected the media to kick up a big stink, which they of course did. What I didn't expect, however, was the government to do the same.
When our democracy came under assault. Dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021.
What a terrible comparison. An estimated 2,335 people died at Pearl Harbor, and 2,977 people died at the Twin Towers. Meanwhile, 5 people died at January 6th. 3 of which being from natural causes and 1 from a drug overdose. In fact, the only person who actually died from gun violence at the scene was one of the protesters themselves. I have to say, equating attacks from both World War II Axis powers and Islamic terrorist organizations with what is essentially an American domestic feud is an unbelievably offensive stretch, to say the least. And such bending of the truth really just goes to show what complete disdain the American progressives have for much of their fellow citizens. But hey, American progressives, keep on failing your poor by shipping their jobs overseas. Keep on enforcing huge amounts of mass migration to artificially deflate wages at home. Keep on pushing divisive identity politics that pits innocence against innocence. Keep on silencing and censoring all of your critics. And keep on calling all your victims terrorists when they inevitably have a tantrum against you in desperation. Because I'm sure that strategy will definitely work out for you in the end. God bless America. I'd say I was completely right on that one. Green it is. Number 2. Macron wins French election. Despite his unreal unpopularity, Macron will win the French election in a landslide, winning Zemmour in the second round by 65% to 35%. Chance of happening, 70%.
And we move now to France and the celebrations underway. President Emmanuel Macron decisively winning re-election.
So it's no secret that France, like all Western European countries, have been mismanaged for the last few decades. Their cities are becoming dumps, their people are always angry, and everything, really, is just falling apart. The reason for this, however, is obvious, because their mainstream politicians are all neoliberals who have zero loyalty to the French people and only care about lining their own bank accounts and the precious EU project. But nevertheless, in 2017, France made the miraculous error of electing a man by the name of Emmanuel Macron, who can only be described as a B-list Bond villain.
I'm never engaged in back-channel process. I always endorse what I do.
Macron promised to fix all of France's problems. Sadly, however, the man is somehow even more neoliberal than the criminals who came before him. And so naturally, his reign as president has only accelerated France's decline into becoming a dump. Fast forward 5 years, and in 2022, the French people finally had an opportunity to replace him. But the issue with the French is that as much as they love to talk the talk, very rarely do they like to walk the walk. Whenever something goes wrong in France, they protest, or worse, riot. They are renowned for it, in fact. The yellow vests during Macron's first term being a prime example. Yet as Macron's first term ticked away and the French people had an opportunity to replace him with someone who actually cared for the country, they'd much rather just play it safe and stay with him instead. Which is, truly, civilizational natural selection in action. It also essentially renders all that protesting and rioting to be completely pointless, just like children having a tantrum, all just meaningless performative nonsense. You know, I actually love the French, but as all decent French people know, they really just aren't as revolutionary as they used to be. Hence why I made this prediction, and I was right. Well, partially right. Rather than winning Zemmour, he won Le Pen, though by a much smaller margin than I thought. I'll give myself a yellow for this one. Number 3. Mass shooting in the USA. Another mass shooting happens in the USA and will be pushed hard by the media to, quote, put an end to the terror that guns bring to American society. Chance of happening, 60%. Yeah, I kind of feel like this one is cheating, to be honest with you. As predicting that a mass shooting will happen in America is kind of like predicting that it will snow in Antarctica. As stated earlier, the United States is slowly becoming an empire of evil. Their people are slowly turning away from God, and as such, are rejecting what it means to be human in favour of being an animal. Their government, and all its institutions, constantly fail their people in extraordinary ways. And thus it should not be too surprising that this nation in decline now has a huge rise in mentally ill individuals, who develop an equally evil desire to take out their rage onto poor innocents. I have already dedicated an entire production to explaining the psychology behind mass shooters, so I won't indulge the conversation further. But let's just say that as bad as things are here in the UK, I cannot help but feel pity for our American brothers and sisters. As gun ownership, which was once considered a common sense right for the righteous, is slowly becoming a burden due to sinners. But whatever you do, don't get rid of it. This one is a green, unfortunately. Number 4. Boris Johnson steps down. Current UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will step down due to being under pressure from his party. He will then be replaced by a man known as Rishi Sunak, who will somehow be even more unpopular than he was. Chance of happening, 50%.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
I'm really good at this. Boris Johnson, who served as British Prime Minister from 2019 to 2022, was without any shadow of a doubt the worst Prime Minister that the country had ever had. And considering that list includes Tony Blair, that is truly quite the achievement. Personally, Boris was a morally reprehensible character. An overweight, snobby, serial adulterer who psychopathically showed zero loyalty to anyone, barring himself. And the fact that this man was supposedly the greatest paragon of conservatism that Britain had to offer is an almost perfect representation of Britain's moral decline, alongside that of its supposed statesmen. It was clear to me that Boris would inevitably be replaced, and a new puppet face would have to be brought in, as the public, both left and right, were starting to find him beyond unbearable. And replaced he was, undemocratically of course, ultimately by a man known as Rishi Sunak, who got quite the hero's welcome upon descending into Downing Street. Not really, as he is truly nothing more than yet another mechanical neoliberal, who dresses well, speaks well, and sounds well, but is ultimately a mere puppet politician.
I pledge that I will serve you with integrity and humility, and I will work day in, day out to deliver for the British people.
A facade that 20 or even just 10 years ago would have been able to fool, but now just makes people more angry. And the fact that I was able to foresee, a year in advance, that this puppet would be given this position, just shows how predictable the underlying clockwork of this criminal regime truly is. Yet again proving the fact that Britain, just like France and all Western nations, are ran by an elitist gang of neoliberals, and will only continue to do so until the people of these nations come to their senses and establish a totalitarian regime that prevents such private sector consolidation of wealth, power and fame, rather than believing in this nonsensical myth of freedom. Sadly, however, I can't give myself a green on this one, as Boris was technically replaced by a brief stint of Liz Truss, another soulless neoliberal, before Rishi. Close, but no cigar. Yellow it is. Which brings us on finally to my wildcard prediction. Number 5. The US government comes clean about aliens. The US government admits to their multi-decade-long disinformation campaign about UFOs, and announces that they believe that alien crafts, which they will rebrand from UFO to UAP, have in fact visited Earth many times. They have no idea who or what they are, and many skeptics will refuse to believe it, citing it as a globalist scheme. Chance of happening, 10%.
It looks like the little breath mint in larger scale, but white, oblong, no apparent flight control surfaces, no apparent visible means of propulsion, and it was maneuvering in a way that we didn't recognize, that we couldn't classify, we couldn't identify. Yeah,
so this was my wildcard prediction, meaning the one that I thought was the least likely to happen. But it did happen. On the 17th of May 2022, the United States Congress held a public discussion about UFOs on Tuesday. Unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, were discussed in a public meeting. On the 9th of June 2022, NASA announced that the agency is commissioning a study team to examine unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs. That is, observations of events in the sky that cannot be identified as aircraft or known natural phenomena, from a scientific perspective. It amazes me how the US government has essentially confirmed, "Hey, aliens are here, and we don't know what to do," and no one cares. Now, I knew they'd have to come clean about this soon, as those who listen to Hex Radio Weekly will know, I personally have seen one of these odd things many years ago. No, I wasn't kidnapped in a cornfield or flirted with by little green men. I just saw an unbelievably inexplainable object in the sky that was so clearly not of this Earth. Now, I don't like to talk about it that much because people either just think that I'm crazy, attention-seeking, or high, plus the fact that I fear it would only distract from the other topics at hand. But either way, aliens are here, folks, and you had better just hope that they like us, because if not, we're done for. I give this one a green, just like the aliens. Now, there were some other predictions, some right, some wrong, but if I listed them all out, I'd be here all day. If you want to see the rest, you can join the House Hexagon Discord server, where they will all be listed for a short time. Overall, I would say that 2022, as the youth like to say, can be considered a vibe shift. 2012 was the year when Western civilization really started to go noticeably downhill, with the rise of neoliberal symptoms such as wokeness, economic consolidation, division, and open Satanism. It was this Titan year whereby the collective consciousness of humanity transformed from being one of a slumbering optimism to a unified dread. But 2022 has felt like a similar transformation, but now from a unified dread into a burning anger. It feels like this year was much more furious than the last few, which I believe is a possible sign of the masses finally starting to wake up to the horrors of neoliberalism. If 2022 is indicative of a decade-long vibe shift in the same way that 2012 was, then we are in for a very angry next few years. Overall, I think that 2022 was a decent year overall. Not amazing, not terrible, but decent. But I wanted to know, what do you think? Thus, I did a poll whereby I asked you all, how has the year 2022 been to you? Just 2% of you said that it was amazing, 46% of you said that it was decent, 46% of you also said that it was meh, whereas 6% of you said that it was awful. So yeah, pretty average for most people, but there's always next year. Which brings us on to predictions for 2023, in order of percentage chance that I think they will actually happen. Number 1. Islam will surge in popularity in the Western world. As the West under neoliberalism continues to socially and economically decline, a large chunk of the wisest Westerners, particularly Christians, will be humbled and soften their hearts to the idea of Islam. Chance of happening, 90%. So look, it's no secret that I adore Islam. Though in my youth, I, like many, mocked Islam as naught more than a backwards faith, I have, in recent months, been humbled and realised that I had been heavily misled. And that on the contrary, it is not those who follow Islam who are backwards, but those of us who have been too arrogant to hear it out. In my desperation to search for solutions that would fix the current decadence of the Western world, I started to note that I resonated a lot with what the Muslims had to say. Thus, for the last year, since February 2022, I've been reading the Quran on an almost daily basis, studying it surah by surah, ayah by ayah, and what I've found truly shocks me. Islam is an almost one-for-one solution to neoliberalism. It strictly prohibits decadence, both socially and economically, while promoting righteousness likewise, both socially and economically. And though, as of the time of recording, I've yet to make a single production dedicated to it, rest assured that's not because of neglect, but passion, as I want to be certain that any information I give to you will be 100% accurate. For I believe, as bizarre as this sounds, that if everyone knew what I now know about Islam, many Westerners would see that far from being our enemy, the Muslims are on the contrary, our ultimate allies. Or perhaps even us ourselves. Now, to be clear, when I say Islam will surge, I don't mean like 90% of the Western population is going to convert to Islam next year, okay? What I mean is, a lot more people are going to take an interest in it, a serious interest, so yeah, look out for it. I've already brought around 20 people into Quranic curiosity with me, and I fully desire to add a few zeros to the end of that equation, but only to those who are open-minded enough. Wait and see. Number 2. Apple will release an AR headset that will change everything. Touted as the inevitable replacement to the iPhone, Apple will wow the world with a headset that can be worn to enhance the user's reality. Chance of happening, 80%. Apple, whether people like it or not, is the most important technology company in the world. Why? Because they have a $2 trillion evaluation and the most valuable brand on the planet. That's why. When Apple makes a move, not only does the world listen, but so too do their competitors. And it's been known for a long time now that Apple has been wanting to get into the augmented reality business. Thus, I have no doubt that they will release an AR headset that will advertise itself as extending the reality of those who wear it. XR, if you would. Eye tracking tech, visible UI, independent apps, etc. It will, of course, be very pricey, and as it's only first-generation technology, likely very primitive. Hence why there will be hardly any first adopters, except the most lavish of tech geeks. But the mere release of this device will prompt the tech industry to focus much more on such devices, which will slowly usher in a fresh wave of innovation, and 2023 will be when it all truly began. Wait and see. Number 3. My channel will significantly stagnate or even outright die as I become increasingly unpopular. Uncomfortable truths about conservatism, gaming, Christianity, and other topics will render huge rage upon me for speaking the facts. Chance of happening, 70%. Now, when I say that I will become unpopular, I don't mean unknown, as that pretty much is the case already. As I've no doubt told you many times before, YouTube doesn't algorithmically do me or anyone else who goes against neoliberalism any favours, as we never get recommended and essentially rely completely on shoutouts from streamers and word of mouth. Hence why you should get your ass on Twitter. But no, when I say unpopular, I mean actually disliked. Because it's one thing to tell people about the destructive nature of neoliberalism, but it's another task completely to tell them how to fix it. As people love hearing about how others are to blame for their problems, but people hate to take responsibility for them. But the facts are that Western civilization is collapsing because too many people have become obese, lazy, lustful, godless goomers, and are allowing it to do so. And the chances are, dear viewer, that you probably aren't a complete saint yourself. I'm sure not. But I don't like people who just sit around and complain endlessly about the world, but then don't actually try to do anything at all to fix it. It's pathetic. And so throughout 2023, I'm going to be making some heavy critiques of numerous terrible but sadly all too common life choices that people make, as well as throwing some metaphorical dung on a lot of specifically right-wing movements that I view as being absolutely useless. And I believe that this will make a lot of people angry, as rather than reflect on themselves and the absurd movements they choose to align with, they'd much rather just bury their heads in the sand and be ruled by their emotions. And so for these people, feel free to head on down to Weenie Hut Juniors and watch some Fortnite videos instead, as this is a place for the big brains. Right now we're on around 6,000 subscribers, but I predict that by the end of 2023, assuming we're still in business, there will be only around 8,000. Extremely low growth, caused not just by throttling, but also by a lot of unsubscribers, who don't feel comfortable being critiqued, as I most certainly will. Wait and see. Number 4. Biden will announce that he will not run for president in 2024. Near the end of the year, Biden will step aside as the Democratic candidate for president, starting a contest of succession. Chance of happening, 50%. Yeah, I mean, no one likes this kid sniffer. Biden was prehistoric when he got in office, and is obviously even more ancient now. He can barely trot out the words that his handlers give him, and frankly, it's just becoming embarrassing, and really ruining the facade that the president is actually the guy with the nuke button. I think the Democrats will try to put someone up who's much younger, preferably someone who can string a sentence together without having a stroke, but whoever this person is will also no doubt really only appeal to weirdos who live in massive urban cities. Overall, the face changes, but apart from that, the neoliberalism stays the same, and America under the Democratic Party only continues to decline. Wait and see. And now, time for the wild card. Number 5. Russia will use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. Tired of Western donations that are proving very costly for Russia, Putin will unleash a nuclear weapon in a remote part of Ukraine as a warning to the world to back off. Chance of happening, 20%. Now, this is obviously unlikely, but still scarily possible. Russia has already lost a lot from their invasion of Ukraine. Massive economic sanctions, huge reputation damages, I mean, you name it. Even if they somehow manage to occupy and annex all of Ukraine, which they don't seem to be capable of doing regardless, it still wouldn't be worth what they've lost in the process of doing so. From Putin's perspective, losing the war is simply non-negotiable at this point, as it would not just certainly be the end of his tenure as president, but potentially the end of the Russian state in its current form. Desperation can make people do desperate things, and if he believes that using a nuclear weapon would make the rest of the world back off, it wouldn't surprise me to see it. Russian media does, after all, have a history of threatening to nuke places, such as over here in the UK, for example. So it's not exactly something that's out of the question, as much as people tend to think. But if this happened, then I imagine the world would collectively piss its pants, and talks of World War III would be inescapable, which would be absolutely hellish. Wait and see? Hopefully not. Once again, I'll be listing a few more predictions on the House Hexagon Discord server, whereby you too can list some of your own. But either way, this has just been a few of my 2023 predictions, so we'll get back to all these next year and see if we are Nostradamus, or just look dumb. Overall, I think 2023 will be a pretty meh year, to be completely honest with you, but what do you think? I did another poll, whereby I asked you all, 2023 will be... 25% of you said that it will be amazing. Another 25% of you said that it will be decent. 26% of you said that it will be meh. And 24% of you said it will be awful. Which is probably the most balanced poll that we will ever have, and to be honest, I'm quite impressed. Yeah, well, nevertheless, let's hope it's a good one. As my word, do we need it? Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I just edited all this in one sitting. My legs feel like jelly. Because I tried to make the 1st of January deadline. And it is currently 1 minute past midnight on the 2nd. So, not quite, but hey, to the Americans it's still the 1st, right? So that technically counts, it's technically still the 1st of January right now, right? Whatever, counts to me. Nevertheless, I'd like to thank the Wall of Famers, specifically Minge Brixton 7, I hope I'm saying that right. Thank you very much, and welcome to you, sir, or madam, whatever you are. Nevertheless, folks, I hope you have a fantastic 2023. As I said, I think it's going to be a pretty meh year this year. It's going to be quite drab. But 2024 is going to be a huge deal. It's a Titan year, alright? If you know what a Titan year is, hats off to you. Nevertheless, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.